Lindbergh baby kidnapping. The Lindbergh baby kidnapping, also known as the crime of the century, was a notorious crime that occurred on March 1, 1932, when Charles Lindbergh Jr., the 20-month-old son of aviator Charles Lindbergh and his wife Anne Morrow Lindbergh, was kidnapped from their home in Hopewell, New Jersey. Charles Lindbergh and Anne Morrow Lindbergh were a prominent couple in American history. Charles Lindbergh was a famous aviator who made the first solo nonstop flight across the Atlantic Ocean in 1927. Anne Morrow Lindbergh was an author and aviator in her own right, and also the wife of Charles Lindbergh. Charles and Anne met in 1927, shortly after his historic flight, when she was working as an assistant to the famous author and aviator, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. They were married in 1929 and had 6 children together. Anne was an accomplished writer and wrote several books, including the best-selling Gift from the Sea, in 1955, which explored the challenges faced by women in the modern world. She was also an aviator and made many flights with her husband. Charles Lindbergh was also involved in politics and was an advocate for isolationism and anti-interventionism. He controversially spoke out against the U.S. entry into World War II and was accused of being sympathetic to Nazi Germany. He later worked for the U.S. military during the war, and his reputation was rehabilitated somewhat in the post-war years. On the night of March 1, 1932, someone entered the Lindbergh family's home in Hopewell, New Jersey, and abducted Charles from his bedroom. A ransom note was later discovered, demanding $50,000 for his safe return. The Lindberghs contacted the police, who began an intensive search for the baby and the kidnappers. The investigation was one of the largest in history, involving the FBI and law enforcement agencies across the country. The ransom money was marked and serial numbers were recorded in an effort to catch the kidnappers when they attempted to spend it. However, despite the ransom being paid, the baby was not returned. On May 12, 1932, the baby's body was found by a truck driver in the woods near the Lindberghs' home. The baby had been killed by a blow to the head, and it was later determined that he had died on the night he was kidnapped. The investigation focused on finding the kidnapper or kidnappers, with the police receiving many leads and tips. The crime led to the passage of the Federal Kidnapping Act, also known as the Lindbergh Law, which made kidnapping a federal crime and allowed for the death penalty in certain cases. One of the most significant pieces of evidence was a homemade ladder that had been used to climb up to the nursery window. The ladder was traced back to a lumber yard in New York City, where it had been sold to a man who used an alias. The investigation eventually led to the arrest and conviction of Bruno Richard Hauptmann, a German immigrant who had a criminal record and was found to have some of the ransom money in his possession. Bruno Richard Hauptmann was born on November 26, 1899, in Kamenz, Germany. He was one of 5 children in his family, and his father was a carpenter. Hauptmann left school at the age of 14 and began working as an apprentice carpenter, like his father. During World War I, Hauptmann served in the German army and was captured by the French. He was imprisoned in France for 4 years before being released and returning to Germany. In 1923, Hauptmann emigrated to the United States, settling in New York City. He worked various odd jobs, including as a carpenter and as a truck driver. He married Anna Schoeffler, a German immigrant, in 1925, and the couple had 2 children. Hauptmann was arrested several times for various crimes, including robbery and burglary, and he served time in prison. However, he was able to maintain his status as a legal resident of the United States. Bruno Richard Hauptmann was arrested on September 19, 1934, over 2 years after the crime was committed. Hauptmann was identified as a suspect after he tried to use some of the ransom money to buy gasoline at a gas station in New York City. The gas station attendant, noticing that the bills had the same serial numbers as those on the ransom money, wrote down the license plate number of Hauptmann's car. Police traced the license plate number to Hauptmann's home in the Bronx, where they found a considerable amount of the ransom money, as well as other evidence that linked Hauptmann to the crime, including the ladder that had been used to climb up to the nursery window. The police also found handwritten notes and sketches that appeared to be related to the kidnapping. Hauptmann claimed that he had received the ransom money from a friend named Isidor Fisch, who had returned to Germany and died before he could be questioned by the police. However, Hauptmann's story was inconsistent, and he was unable to provide a plausible explanation for how he had come into possession of the money and other evidence. The prosecution presented evidence that included handwriting analysis, witness testimony, and the discovery of some of the ransom money in his possession. After his arrest, Hauptmann maintained his innocence and claimed that he had been framed by the police. However, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. Hauptmann's trial and execution were highly controversial, with many people believing that he was innocent and that the evidence against him was weak. Some people have argued that Hauptmann was the victim of anti-German sentiment in the United States during a time of rising tensions in Europe. However, others have pointed to Hauptmann's criminal record and the evidence found in his possession as proof of his guilt. He appealed his conviction, but the appeals were unsuccessful, and he was executed in the electric chair at the New Jersey State Prison in Trenton on April 3, 1936. The execution was witnessed by members of the press and several members of the Lindbergh family. It was a highly controversial event, with many people arguing that Hauptmann had been wrongly convicted and that there were serious flaws in the prosecution's case. In the years following Hauptmann's execution, there have been ongoing debates and investigations into whether he was actually guilty of the crime. Some people believe that he was wrongly convicted and that there may have been other people involved in the kidnapping and murder of Charles Lindbergh Jr. However, the vast majority of historians and experts continue to believe that Hauptmann was responsible for the crime. Charles Lindbergh died of lymphoma, a type of cancer, on August 26, 1974, at his home in Maui, Hawaii. He had been diagnosed with cancer several months earlier and had been undergoing treatment. Lindbergh's legacy has been re-evaluated, and he is remembered as a complex and multifaceted figure in American history. His contributions to aviation and his pioneering spirit continue to inspire people around the world. Anne Morrow Lindbergh died of natural causes on February 7, 2001, at her home in Passumpsic, Vermont. She was 94 years old at the time of her death. Despite the tragedies and controversies that marked her life, Anne remained a respected and beloved figure in American culture. Her writing, particularly her reflections on the challenges facing women in the modern world, has continued to resonate with readers around the world.